Alright, one more of these kit videos and then I can go back to making other stuff. Tri-Slosher Nouveau and Neo Sploosh, let's go. Let's talk about the Sploosh as a weapon in general, so I can explain why the Neo Sploosh kit makes me nervous. Sploosh is a weapon that's basically melee range compared to anything that sees competitive play, so without a sub-weapon that it can use as a poking tool, like the Sploosh 7's Splat Bomb from Splatoon 2, it can't hold ground on the front lines at all. Anything with remotely longer range will just walk out into the open and shoot it before it can do anything. It ends up playing a lot more like an ink brush than another shooter, because, like the ink brush, it has very low range, but a ton of mobility to enable it to flank and shark. The main weapon in a vacuum is going to try and flank all over the place and be a distraction, counting on its mobility and fast kill time around blind corners to distract and slow down the enemy team. This playstyle, which isn't that useful at top level to begin with, is even worse in Splatoon 3 because the maps are hallways. There are very few meaningful flank routes. The Curling Bomb Sploosh kit has been totally absent from competitive play even since Splatoon 2, and for good reason. The Curling Bomb gives it utility with regard to movement, but with no way to poke at opponents, all you need to do is slowly walk forward at it with a longer ranged weapon, and as long as you paint defensively and don't let it get on top of you from a blind corner or something, it has no way in and has to give up ground. In Splatoon 2 it had Splashdown, the worst special in the entire game, dooming it further. The Sploosh 7 kit, on the other hand, was one of the best Rainmaker weapons in all of Splatoon 2. It didn't even have that great of a special, though the special did synergize well with it, but the fact that it got a Splat Bomb meant that it got to spam bombs like a junior, giving it tons of stopping power against the Rainmaker carrier. It could also shark for all but guaranteed splats on Rainmaker carriers, and it moved around the map and painted it extremely quickly to facilitate fast offensive pushes and defensive rotations. Not knowing where one of these was meant you had to play slower to avoid getting sharked, and playing slow in Rainmaker doesn't work. Possibly my least favorite weapon kit in all of Splatoon was the Splatoon 2 Neo Sploosh-O-Matic, which had beacons and missiles. Like we mentioned, a major factor in whether a Sploosh kit works is if it's given a sub that lets it poke from long distance, and that is not what a beacon does. In theory, the beacons could let you flank, but at a certain level, players are going to be aware of the beacon placements and watch for flanks from that area, and then you still have the same old problem of figuring out how to close distance against a Kensa Splatter Shot, or a Kensa 52 Gal, or a Kensa Rapid Blaster that saw you a mile away with a torpedo, or a Jet Squelcher that's trying to paint the same turf you are. You get my point. What Neo Splash had, though, was a spammable top-tier special and a main weapon that painted well for it. So a lot of players who didn't connect to the competitive scene just decided to abandon trying to control space with the main weapon altogether. This was never seen in competitive play, and in fact, as soon as you got into lobbies that were past 2100 X power or so, you never saw it in solo queue either, because the strategy falls off that hard. But whenever I was in a low-level X-rank lobby and saw a Neo Sploosh, I knew they were going to take an irrelevant area of the map, paint it for missiles, fire missiles, and then find another irrelevant area of the map and paint it for missiles, and repeat. They'd play from the opposite end of the map from everybody else for the entire game. Beacons weren't for teammates to jump into, no, they were to irrelevant areas of the map so the Sploosh could get back to them when they got painted over and could be used to get missiles again. They turned themselves into a single salmon run flyfish. It was an easier strategy to execute than playing the game in a more orthodox way, as it didn't require you to learn how to take fights with your main weapon, so a lot of players fell into the trap of learning it and grinding it all the way up to X rank. The problem is that this strategy has clear counterplay and practically no skill expression available to push it any further than the bar you had to clear to get into X rank. I rarely ever use the term hard stuck to refer to someone trying to rank up. Usually when someone uses that word, it comes across more as like a gross dismissive judgment call about a person's ability to improve at the game. But with this strategy, players were going to get hard stuck no matter how strong they were at the game. They're only interacting with the enemy team through missiles, and missiles are controlled more by an interaction between the enemy team and the missiles than by you. The enemy team determines where the missiles land by where they choose to position, and there's a lot they can do to keep themselves and their teammates safe by positioning themselves for the missiles to fall harmlessly. You only choose where to aim them from and when to fire them. When to fire them tends to end up being as soon as I have them, and where to fire them from tends to end up being wherever it's safe for me to farm them from. So this strategy surrenders basically any skill expression. You can't make the strategy any better by being better. The Kensa Splattershot and Jet Squelcher both farmed a lot of missiles, but their main weapons and playstyles enabled them to have an impact on fights that broke out once those missiles went down. K-Shot was a Slayer weapon while the missiles were falling. It went in there and moved around and tried to splat people. The Jet Squelcher took anchor positions and enforced space the team had control over. Being able to read the opponents, know the game state, recognize an advantage, press that advantage, and execute on the plan by moving well and aiming well at those opponents, all of these skills allowed you to have more of an impact as those weapons than you had with just the missiles. This Sploosh game plan did not allow you to affect the game that way. If you had a K-Shot, you would go into fights with 4 players and a set of missiles landing on the enemy team when you got there. If you had one of these Neo Splooshes, you'd go into a fight with 3 players and a set of missiles that might go off sometime within about 10 seconds of when the fight starts because, man, they can't see when it's starting, they're on the opposite end of the map. So even if the Sploosh got more missiles, those missiles were lower value than another weapon's missiles, and they came at the cost of having another player on your team that's trying to control contested areas of the map. Why am I talking about Splatoon 2 this much? Because the Neo Sploosh kit is Beacons and Killer Whale 5.1. It's not missiles, but it is dangerously similar. Global range special, pretty low activation time, relatively spammable. I'm worried people will do the same thing again. Far be it from me to dictate that people play the game differently from the way they want to, but please realize that playing the game that way will not work past a certain level of skill, and it will also mean you won't learn a number of crucial skills for more orthodox playstyles, because you'll have been avoiding learning them by using Killer Whale spam as a crutch. In competitive play, it is actually possible that this might have a niche. The Ink Brush is almost a direct competitor to it, since it has the same special, same sort of main weapon playstyle, and actually has a lethal bomb. But if there ends up being a use case for beacons, it might be something Brush players consider flexing onto. I couldn't say for sure, it's a little outside my wheelhouse, but there might be something there. Sploosh can almost do the same thing the Brush can, moving quickly so the whale locks in and fires from wider angles than other weapons are capable of creating. It would be very, very niche though, as unless the team really wants those beacons, they're not going to want to pass up on the Brush's Splat Bomb to get them, so it may still be outclassed. Maybe another comparison would be to the vanilla Dapple Doolies. While it gives up the Tacticooler that a team might be wanting for Rainmaker, if they want beacons in another mode, you'd be getting a similar kind of utility out of this short-range, flanking, sharking pest that can get into weird corners of the map. Again, very niche, and in my opinion, not worth it if it leads to a legion of solo queue whale spammers hampering their growth with the game by trying to cheese out wins with a gimmicky strategy. I'm very uneasy about this kit. Tri-Nouveau is actually really interesting though. Similar to the Sploosh, Tri, with its short range, has more trouble getting into range to take a fight than it actually has winning that fight once it gets there. Longer ranged weapons are a problem for it, and the first Tri-Slosher kit really suffered from not having a sub-weapon it could use to poke at longer ranged weapons that were in its way. If they perceived the Tri-Slosher probably just had to back up. Not so, now that it has a threatening bomb in the Fizzy. That Fizzy gives it a ton of cool possibilities. It's always been a sub-weapon that gives poor painting weapons a way to have more paint output and charge special faster, allowing this version of the Tri-Slosher to possibly play support, despite underwhelming paint output from the main weapon. Fizzy is also super cool for it in that it doubles as a mobility enhancer. Single-charge Fizzy bombs give a lot of the movement utility that curling bombs have, but without sacrificing the combat utility. Speaking of combat utility, Fizzy Bomb Directs do enough damage that they'd combo with a single Tri-Slosher slosh for a splat, and you'd get the same combo from 2 indirect hits. That's a really interesting set of possibilities to give the Tri-Slosher. Imagine, for example, the Tri-Slosher throwing a Fizzy Bomb, and then immediately swimming through the trail created by the bomb as it flies, getting 2 indirect hits with the Fizzy while it approaches, and then finishing the splat with a single slosh as soon as it gets in range. Does that work in practice? I don't know. I've never had the means to try it, but it's definitely worth experimenting with. The Tacticooler isn't the best special it could get, but it does have some synergy. Tri-Slosher is a very aggressive weapon, and having the cooler buff to dive in and go for trades really suits its playstyle. The classic Tri-Slosher play is sharking into range, splatting 2 players at once because they're standing next to each other and your shots are wide enough that you hit both of them at the same time, and trading 2 for 1. Tacticooler makes that play so much more worth it, because you getting splatted doesn't hurt as much as them getting splatted. You still need to figure out how to get in range, and Tacticooler isn't helping you much on that front since it reveals your location. But this kit is definitely worth at least exploring if you're a bucket player who's been waiting for a new Tri-Slosher kit. The Kensa sloshing machine from Splatoon 2, getting Fizzy Bomb, turned it into a high tier despite having the worst special in the entire game. Maybe this new bucket kit could see a similar rise. At the very least, it's something we've never seen before, and I'm always a lot happier to see that than to see duplicate kits or a repeat of a kit that was tried before and didn't work then. If we learn that in practice it doesn't work, well, at least we learned something.